It is very poor policy to dwell negatively on unpleasant aspects of the past that you know, because some portion of the probable self may still be involved in that past. The concentration can allow greater bleed-through and adverse identification, because that part will be one background that you have in common with any probable selves who sprang from that particular source. To dwell upon the possibility of illness or disaster is equally poor policy, for you set up negative webs of probabilities that need not occur. You can theoretically alter your own past as you have known it, for time is no more something divorced from you than probabilities are. The past existed in multitudinous ways. You only experienced one probable past. By changing this past in your mind now, in your present, you can change not only its nature but its effect, and not only upon yourself but upon others. Pretend a particular event happened that greatly disturbed you. In your mind, imagine it not simply wiped out, but replaced by another event of more beneficial nature. Now, this must be done with great vividness and emotional validity, and many times. It is not a self-deception. The event that you choose will automatically be a probable event, which did in fact happen, though it is not the event you chose to perceive in your given probable past. Telepathically, if the process is done correctly, your idea will also affect any people who were connected with the original event, though they can choose to reject as well as accept your vision. This is not a book on techniques, so I will not go into this particular method deeply, but merely mention it here. Remember, however, that in a most legitimate way, many events that are not physically perceived or experienced are as valid as those that are, and are as real within your own invisible psychological environment. There are, in your terms then, unlimited probable future events for which you are now setting groundworks. The nature of the thoughts and feelings you originate and those that you habitually or characteristically receive set a pattern, so you will choose from those probable futures those events that will physically become your experience. Because there are bleed-throughs and interconnections, it is possible for you to tune into a quote-unquote future event, say of an unfortunate nature, an event for which you are headed if you continue on your present course. A dream about it, for instance, may so frighten you that you avoid the event and do not experience. If so, such a dream is a message from a probable self who did experience the event. So can a child then, in a dream, receive such communications from a probable future self, of such a nature that its life is completely changed. The entire identity is being now. All divisions are merely illusions, so one probable self can hold out a helping hand to another, and through these intercommunications, the various probable selves in your terms begin to understand the nature of their identity. Now, this leads to other adventures in which whole civilizations may be involved, for as individuals have their probable destinies, so do civilizations, nations, and inhabited planetary systems. Your historical Earth, as you know it, has developed in many different ways, and there is a deeply unconscious connection that unites all such manifestations. In their own way, even atoms and molecules retain a knowledge of the forms through which they have passed, and so the individuals that compose any given civilization contain deep within themselves the inner knowledge of experiments and trials, successes and failures, in which the races have also been involved at other levels of reality. In some probable realities, Christianity as you know it did not flourish. In some, males did not dominate. In others, the makeup of physical matter simply followed different lines. Now, all of these probabilities are in the air about you, so to speak, and I describe them as faithfully as I can, but I must relate them with concepts with which you are somewhat familiar. To some extent, then, the quote-unquote truth must be sifted through your own conceptual patterns in order for you to comprehend it at all. Suffice it to say, you are surrounded by other influences and events. Certain of these you perceive in your three-dimensional reality. You accept them as real without realizing that they are only portions of other events. Where your vision fails, you think reality ceases. So again, you must train yourselves to look between events, between objects, within yourself when you do not seem to be doing anything. Watch out for events that appear to make no sense, for they are often clues to larger invisible events. Now, the nature of matter itself is not understood. You perceive it at a certain quote-unquote stage. Using your terms now, and speaking as simply as possible, there are other forms of matter beyond those you see. These forms are quite real and vivid, quite physical to those who react to their particular sphere of activity. In terms of probabilities, therefore, you choose certain acts, unconsciously transform these into physical events or objects, and then perceive them. But those unchosen events also go out from you and are projected into these other forms. Now, the behaviors of atoms and molecules is involved here, for again, these are only present within your universe during certain stages. Their activity is perceived only during the range of particular vibratory rhythms. When your scientists examine them, for example, they do not examine the nature, say, of an atom. They only explore the characteristics of an atom as it acts or shows itself within your system. Its greater reality completely escapes them. You understand that there are spectrums of light. So are there spectrums of matter. Your system of physical reality is not dense in comparison with some others. The dimensions that you give to physical matter barely begin to hint at the varieties of dimensions possible. Some systems are far heavier or lighter than your own, though this may not involve weight in the terms with which you are familiar. Probable actions emerge then into matter systems quite as valid as your own, and quite as consistent. If you are used to thinking in single-line thoughts, so you think of events that you know as complete things or actions, not realizing that what you perceive is but a fraction of their entire multidimensional existence. In greater terms, it is impossible to separate one physical event from the probable events, for these are all dimensions of one action. It is basically impossible to separate the quote-unquote you that you know from the probable yous of which you are unaware, for the same reasons. There are always inner pathways, however, leading between probable events. Since all of them are manifestations of an act in its becoming, then the dimensions between these are illusions. The physical brain alone cannot pick up these connections with any great success. The mind, which is the inner counterpart of the brain, can at times perceive the far greater dimensions of any given event through a burst of sudden intuition or comprehension that cannot be adequately described on the verbal level. As I have said frequently, time as you think of it does not exist, yet in your terms, time's true nature could be understood if the basic nature of the atom was ever made known to you. In one way, an atom could be compared to a microsecond. It seems as if an atom quote-unquote exists steadily for a certain amount of time. Instead, it phases in and out, so to speak. It fluctuates in a highly predictable pattern and rhythm. It can be perceived within your system only at certain points in this fluctuation, so it seems to scientists that the atom is steadily present. They are not aware of any gaps of absence as far as the atom is concerned. In those periods of non-physical projection, the off periods of fluctuation, the atoms quote-unquote appear in another system of reality. In that system, they are perceived in what are quote-unquote on points of fluctuation, and in that system also then the atoms seem to appear steadily. There are many such points of fluctuation, but your system of course is not aware of them, nor of the ultimate actions, universes, and systems that exist within them. Now, the same sort of behavior occurs on a deep, basic, secret, and unexplored psychological level. The physically oriented consciousness, responding to one phase of the atom's activity, comes alive and awake to its particular existence, but in between are other fluctuations in which consciousness is focused upon entirely different systems of reality, each of these coming awake and responding, and each one having no sense of absence, and memory only of those particular fluctuations to which they respond. These fluctuations are actually simultaneous. It would seem to you as if there would be gaps between the fluctuations, and the description I have used is the best one for our purposes, but the probable systems all exist simultaneously, and basically, following this discussion, the atom is in all of these other systems at one time. Now, we have been speaking in terms of fantastically swift pulses or fluctuations, so smooth and quote-unquote brief that you do not notice them. But there are also quote-unquote slower, more vast, quote-unquote longer fluctuations from your end of the scale. These affect entirely different systems of existence than any closely connected with your own. The experience of such kinds of consciousness is highly alien to you. One such fluctuation might take several thousand of your years, for example. These several thousand years would be experienced, say, as a second of your time, with the events occurring within it perceived simply as a present period. Now, the consciousness of such beings would also contain the consciousness of large numbers of probable selves and systems, experienced quite vividly and clearly as multiple presents. These multiple presents can be altered at any of an actual number of infinite points, infinity not existing in terms of one indefinite line, but in terms of numberless probabilities and possible combinations growing out of each act of consciousness. Such beings, with their multiple presence, may or may not be aware of your particular system. Their multiple present may or may not include it. You may be a part of their multiple present without even being aware of it. In much more limited terms, your probable realities are multiple presents. The image for an analogy of an eye within an eye within an eye endlessly repeated may be useful here.